It is 10 o'clock on a Tuesday morning, September the 3rd. And if it's a Tuesday during hurricane season, that means it's time to track the tropics. And on a multilateral front, from Central Florida, I'm West 2 meteorologist Eric Burris.
And in Savannah, Georgia, I'm WJCL 22 Chief Meteorologist Jeremy Nelson.
All right, so Jeremy, we've got a couple of systems, couple of areas that we are watching, my friend. But, looking overall at the tropical Atlantic basin, there's just not a whole lot of stuff going on right now.
No, and again, we're not complaining about that. We have these three areas of interest. And so far, the one that we thought maybe last week, I think it was already starting to get highlighted and maybe it would develop in the Caribbean. That chance has been pretty much leveled off at
Yep.
40%.
Yep.
And the wave right now sort of may have a few thunderstorms with it, nothing very organized. And that 40% chance is over the next 7 days. So it doesn't mean really imminent that chance. It's probably going to be a little bit later this week or into the weekend if it develops. And then you can maybe talk about those in the tropical Atlantic.
Yeah. So let's get right to it and kind of go 1, 2, 3 through these areas to watch. The first one, as Jeremy had mentioned, is this area here in the Caribbean Sea. It's starting to bubble up some convection, but it just hasn't done much to produce. Now, over the next couple of days' time, the expectation is it moves off to the west, gets into a favorable environment for formation, then impacts the Yucatan Peninsula. And because of that, obviously land interaction keeps it weak, and then it moves out into the extreme southern Gulf of Mexico, the Bay of Campeche, to which the models want to lift it. Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, have to see how that plays out. But the models have been less and less and less active on this. At one point in time, it really looked like it wanted to fire up. The next area just off the coast of Africa, out near the Cabo Verde Islands, has a medium chance, 40% chance of formation over the next 7 days' time. And there is the potential of seeing a development here. But the models that do try to form this really do keep it as a fish system. And then the last one, this wave on the right-hand side of your screen here out in the middle of the Atlantic, it's showing some signs of life. And there is the potential of some formation, but there's some dry air here. There's some wind shear here. And Jeremy, all said, the tropical Atlantic basin really does want to keep fairly quiet over these next couple of days.
Yeah, I mean, you look at it just on the surface, you'll see the National Hurricane Center, those areas of interest. You're like, wow, look at that. Things are starting to turn a lot more active out there. But then you really dive down into some of the model data, and it doesn't look super impressive at the moment. So maybe we get one out of those three to form into a name storm. We'll see how it plays out. Right now, I guess if one is going to, it would probably be the lead wave potentially.
Yeah, I would think so. And so one of the things obviously we can do to check this out is to look at the computer model data, right? And just kind of see where we are. So let's dial this up here and kind of get an idea. And Jeremy, first off, just looking at the tropical basin right now, there just doesn't look like much. I'm going to go to the full shot here. This is the anomaly pressure. So the warm shades you see there, that's high pressure. The kind of the blues and the greens, that's the lower pressure. And we see some areas of low pressure. This is the GFS, for example. But it's not until we kind of get, into about this Friday or so. And I'm just going to pause this here. This Friday, the GFS is showing, it looks like 4 areas of low pressure, but none of which is overly strong. It's just kind of sloppy lows.
Yeah, and that one is down near the Yucatan
Yep.
area. And then there's another one that is well west of the East Coast. Probably going to be a low pressure area, but then start to question if something develops, is that subtropical or what would that be? And then almost all season long, we get some sort of wave or thunderstorm complex that moves off Africa. And a lot of times it is getting sheared apart or it happens to dip over a little cooler water there. So definitely has been some struggles with tropical development this year. We were talking about how I don't think it's any just one thing you can point to. And also, before we get into the numbers here that Eric will show, is that La Nina hasn't even formed. Right now, it's neutral.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I think a lot of the forecasts leading into this season, we're thinking, hey, by September, October, November, we'd probably be talking about a La Nina, more favorable mid or upper level winds in the Atlantic basin. And right now that's neutral. So that hasn't formed. So I think it's multi layers of different things that have contributed so far to what has been probably closer to average season, which is some of the numbers definitely going to start trending below average.
Right. Well, and you and I talked about this a lot when we put out our hurricane forecast, right? Like, you can't just look at water temperatures because that's your fuel, but you still need that spark, that one little spark. And we just don't have much of that, whether it's the Madden-Julian oscillation, whether it's wind shear, whether it's the Saharan dust. All of these things have been kind of working against itself to really develop. And to that point, Jeremy, even in looking at our long range forecast areas, the areas that we had discussed, they are producing little storm systems, but there's nothing overly strong at this point.
Yeah, I mean, hey, we keep the receipts, so to speak. We keep the maps. We go back and look at them. The low pressure areas have been there. They just haven't really formed much. We're in one of our periods right now, and we have low pressure off the southeast coast. Another low is going to run maybe along the Gulf Coast, Northeast Gulf, and near the Southeast Coast as we go through this week. And that's all within our window. But as of right now, it doesn't really look like there'll be tropical development with it. So when we put those time frames out, it's when the part of the pattern repeats, and then we say the chances of something developing get a little bit higher, especially in peak season. And hey, the peak date of hurricane season is coming up on September the 10th.
Yeah, yeah. And it's wild to think that we haven't had a system since Ernesto weeks ago. Now, that said, as you mentioned, we probably will get something trying to get going. So let's take a look. We had shown the GFS raw model data. Ensembles are really a good way to kind of get an idea. And you start to see some of these green shades, multiple little circles. The ensemble, the European ensemble at least, is taking that low area across into the Bay of Campeche. This is going to be Tuesday, September 10th, right at the peak of hurricane season, kind of in that southwestern Gulf, and tries to develop and bring an area of low pressure in around September 11th, September 12th. Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, the Florida panhandle even. But that's really about the only echo of activity that the ensembles are really showing. And to that point, Jeremy, being that that's the peak of hurricane season and that's really the only thing, it really keeps things fairly quiet, at least for now.
Yeah, does that map that you were showing happen to show the central or eastern part of the Atlantic?
Yeah.
We can maybe see if any of those waves, what they do a little bit closer to Africa.
Yep.
Those have really struggled this season, sort of making it to the west. Just looks like kind of little dots all over the place
Yeah, I
there.
mean
Nothing.
it does try to develop some, right? I mean, this is as far out as it goes, but so it's got some ensemble members trying to do something, but it's not, you're not seeing a ton of activity out there.
And it doesn't seem like the various ensemble runs there, the particular models have a consensus. Those out
No.
there are kind of all over the place.
Yeah,
Where
yeah.
at least the one in the Gulf looks like several members there are trying to get something going.
Yeah, yeah. So look, we'll see. We'll see how this plays out. But for now, the ensembles are really not wanting to do much. But, again, Jeremy, you had mentioned, for example, the peak of hurricane season, right? Like, here's the uphill climb we have. Okay. We're not quite to the peak, but September 10th is the peak of hurricane season. We're just a week or so away from that. And we haven't had a named system in weeks.
Yeah, and yeah, September 10th there, and then it does start to go down fairly quickly. But as we know, really the front half of October can be very busy in the Atlantic Basin. We had some named storms in November. I think if we are, I don't know about the switch just flipping and all of a sudden we have all kinds of named storms. We'll see if that would happen. We're not really looking at that in what we've just shown you. October, though, could be definitely a little bit different. We get the new pattern starting to set up. Maybe the ENSO starts to trend a little more towards La Nina, but we're thinking it's probably just going to stay neutral or very close to it through
Right.
hurricane season. So no big changes with the ENSO. So the La Nina that was forecast to develop probably at least not going to happen this hurricane season.
Yeah, And doesn't that just go to long range forecasting is humbling. It is not easy,
Hmm.
and we do the best we can, but we're never going to sit here and tell you we're perfect. And
Right.
you know, you had mentioned the new part of the pattern. We should discuss what that means. So when Jeremy and I work on our forecasting, we use you know, some different methodology than other folks do, and you know, love it, hate it. It is what it is. We've had some pretty good success with it, but into October, a whole new kind of long range harmonic sets up. To a significant part of our forecasting, October, November is kind of sit back, relax, and watch the show.
Yeah, and that's why we do this every single year. Is we kind of guide people through. We take the lows that are out there. We say, hey, let's pay attention to this one. If there happens to be name storms in October or November, we really pay attention to where they're located, kind of how they track, because those are definitely some key ingredients to the future forecasts that we'll be putting out. So we still have some important parts of the pattern coming up here a little bit later on in September. We need to watch, I think, somewhere very close to the 20th into that week there. So that would be in about the third week of September.
Yeah.
So models are kind of hinting at maybe something in that area. And of course, that would be a recycle of the pattern that produced Debbie. So,
Right. And so to that point, then let give me 2 seconds here. I'm gonna pop this. I'm gonna pop this up and of course direct. But you know, let me just show you. Let me go back to the raw GFS here. And let me switch over to this view. Let me switch over to pressure because you can almost see if you look here, watch around the southeast coast right in here, how around Florida at the very end here, you end up seeing these little, you know, the GFS is kind of showing these little lows coming out of Florida, out of the Bahamas. That's kind of this lowered area of pressure, and the GFS is kind of saying like, all right, there may be some lowered pressure with these little waves, these little impulses that are kind of popping up. I think that it's still obviously super early, but we were looking at the Bering Sea rule a little bit earlier. There's kind of this frontal back. All right, why not pop it up instead of just mentioning it, right?
right.
Yeah. All right. Give me
And
two.
these are things we use. We don't expect other people to really
Yeah.
understand them, but hey, we'll show you what we're looking at as well.
Right. All right. So this is that BSR, and I'm gonna roll it through time. All right. So basically, what you're actually looking at here is the weather in Alaska, and what we're looking at is like a teleconnection of sorts. And right in here, we've got this decent little coastal low showing up, kind of in the same spot that Debbie had moved through,
Yep.
and kind of
So
firing up
remember, yeah.
out
So
off
as
of
you said,
the
what
coast of
we're
the
looking
Carolinas
at
there.
is the North Pacific, and then we have overlaid the U.S. on this. So there's a lot of things going on here, and then we project forward, say like I think it's around 14 to like 18 days,
Yeah.
somewhere in that window, and
Yeah.
then hypothetically, these sort of parts of the pattern then kind of land on the Gulf Coast, Southeast Florida area. And again, this is several other people have kind of been following this as well. So this is just another tool we use to kind of try to give us a hint of what
Yeah.
may be lying ahead. And I kept the maps. I'll send them to Eric. Maybe we can put something together from I think it was around August 17th, and
Yeah.
they're like spot on with the surface features
I
coming up this week.
I was hoping you were gonna have something to hold up.
No, I don't have a printout of it. Sorry.
We'll work. Listen, I make fun of him. Sidebar: I make fun of him so much for having writing things out, but then like in moments like this, he's like, "Oh, hold on a second." He pulls out a piece of paper and holds it. It's like,
Right.
all right,
Yeah.
you've got your receipts. So anyway, yeah, like kind of mid, you know, what is that? September 18th through 20th may have that recycle of Debbie, which we identified as a bigger part of our weather pattern back on March the 1st when we put out our hurricane season forecast.
Yeah. That's the one I had is the most significant for, especially for my area.
Yeah.
And of course, last time around, we had solid foot to about 14, 15 inches of rain. Some extensive flooding occurred in our area here, and then some wind gusts to top 50 miles per hour. It was a
Right.
tropical storm for us. Florida made landfall as a hurricane.
Right, right. So this is the area that we had highlighted. You can see kind of the red kind of highlights there. June 20th through the 26th, there was a low there. Did
Oh
not
yeah, it
hurricane.
was. and it was highlighted by the National Hurricane Center.
Right. So then
It
August 5th
wasn't.
through the 12th, we know
It
what
was
happened
very
August 5th
interesting.
through the 12th.
Yep. And then coming up, as we head towards the third week there
Yeah.
of September, the towards the end of that. So we'll keep a close eye on it, and maybe that's something we'll start to see show up on some model data as we get later this week.
Yeah, yeah. So that's kind of where we're at. That's looking, that's taking a nice deep dive, a nice long range dive. I would also add, Jeremy, I have a cruise, like the end of that pattern. So let's hope this thing wants to edge on the earlier side of it,
Okay. All right.
please.
Maybe you can go on a hurricane cruise.
Maybe I was an idiot and booked a cruise in the middle of hurricane season. We'll see.
Hey, you can get some good deals as long as you
There it is.
maybe get the insurance or there's some sort of cancellation policy.
We'll see. We'll see.
You're
All
an
right.
experienced
Anyways,
cruiser, so you know the ins and outs of it. All right. Any questions on your end?
yeah. So for right now, everybody's just kind of talking about how they enjoy the bit of a quieter pattern. A lot of people are talking about how maybe it could help with homeowners insurance. I certainly would have my doubts. We did have on my coffee talk yesterday, we were talking about this, Jeremy, and there was one person who works in the homeowners insurance realm who said that it actually might. And then I said, well, we're going to need to talk to you and get you on camera. Not like to
Right.
quote you, but like to be like, how does that work? Because I do feel like we have seen prices only going up and up and up. And obviously this year, maybe it's a little bit quiet. We can only hope for that to continue.
Yeah, that would be nice to catch a break. I know in my area there was probably way more claims than past hurricane
Right.
seasons because
Right.
of the flooding
Yep.
in some of the communities. So again, as a whole, I would say it's been improved. Probably in the Houston area, there may have been some claims as well,
Yeah.
as Beryl went through there. It's all about if these kind of hit rural areas. It's tough to hit a rural area
Right.
along the coast because everyone wants some coastal property. Um, but as long as they avoid huge populated
Right.
areas, maybe down the road that is something that would help insurance rates. That's something I don't know a lot about, and I think that's why we'd have to defer to some experts on that.
Well, and so to that point, maybe we get that gentleman on the old track in the tropics at the end of hurricane season just to discuss, like, being an insider. This is not a representative of your employer, whatever, blah blah blah, legalese. But what do you see trends being, that sort of thing? Because I think, look, all of us live in hurricane country, hence, there's several hundred of us nerding out on a Tuesday morning. So there's that. But also, like, we all are kind of living and dying by these insurance premiums at the end of the day.
Right. So one thing, I don't think we showed it yet. If we could just hit the name storms and maybe the ACE and
Yep.
give people kind of an idea where we're at,
Yep.
because some of the things we fall a little bit behind, others were still a little more active season. Five name storms should be around seven now. And last year at this point, we already had 12 storms and we finished with 20.
Yep.
So that kind of gives you an idea.
Yep.
If we're going to get to even probably 12 to 14, things would have to pick up here soon.
And to that point, but without even going on for a second, like, let's just, when we put out our forecast, the data led us to believe it should have been a below average season. But I think you and I hedged our bets a little bit. We'll see how it ends up being, but
Yeah.
the data, and you've got the receipts on that, the
Yeah.
data did suggest a below average season.
Yeah, I would say average to maybe below average. But then again, the ACE scores on a lot of those seasons, even though they didn't have maybe a ton of name
Yep.
storms, they still had a lot of ACE. So there was a higher percentage of hurricanes within the seasons that we looked at. But
Right.
again, that was assuming that a La Nina was going to form
Right.
because it was those years did have um, a trend towards a La
Right.
Nina during hurricane season, which so far we haven't had.
Yeah, yeah. It's still enzo neutral, as you had mentioned
Hmm.
earlier. So, as far as ACE goes, this is the accumulated cyclonic energy. So, it takes into account a storm's intensity, how long it's around, and puts a total score on the scoreboard. So, for this year, 55.1 ACE points so far. 30-year average is 43.1. And last year through today, 56. So, this is a big metric. Even though we are well behind the 30-year average in terms of named storms, we still have a higher ACE because of Beryl being such a big hurricane. And even with last year having more named storms than this year, we're right in that same ballpark of ace scores.
Yes, and Beryl contributed a huge amount to that
Yep.
total. We also had a couple other hurricanes. Ernesto was around for a while. Debbie was a hurricane, maybe not for all that long.
Right.
That was mainly a tropical storm. We'll see how that trends, but the ace is going to start catching. If we don't have another storm for a week or
Right.
whatever, we'll probably regroup next Tuesday, and then those will be to average or maybe even a little bit below because the ACE score goes up very fast. A typical season, the ACE score is around what, like 120.
Something like that. Yeah, yeah. And we've certainly landed higher than that here recently. So, yeah.
Yep.
But the good news, Jeremy, is that for right now, we've got clouds, we've got areas of interest, but there is nothing that looks to develop. Gotta love that.
Yes, no complaints here. It overall makes everyone's life easier, especially ours when it comes to maybe workload. We're always tracking this, but it does get busy. We'll get busy again sometime
Yeah.
this hurricane season.
Yeah.
But for now, we'll just continue to monitor these sort of interesting, not interesting areas of interest, right?
Right. And we'll do so with not working 12-hour shifts.
Yes.
Susan on your page just asked, and I think it's a good question, what causes La Nina?
Well, so we're talking about the upwelling of cooler water
Right.
in like the equatorial Pacific. And so far, we haven't. You can show the anomalies there. I mean, there is some cool water there.
Right. But it's
Um,
not enough.
No, it's not enough, and they look at a specific area in the Pacific, and also in order to get a La Nina, you can't just have 1 month where the water temps like 1 degree Celsius below average
Right.
over an area. It needs to be, I believe, like three successive periods.
Well, and you look at like the equatorial Atlantic, the main development region, we are running above average. So, it that's where our hurricane forecasting I think really does well because we take into account all kinds of metrics, right? And that's why, look, if everybody blows it, if everybody called for an above average season and ends up being a below average season, the way I look at it is at least our numbers will have been lower. I mean, because we went kind of
Mhm.
near to slightly above average. Um, eh, you
Yeah,
know,
averages 14. We had 16 to 20. I
yeah.
think we talked about this. Hurricane Center had 17 to 25, I believe,
Mhm.
initially. Colorado State had 23 with their first forecast. They upped it to 25,
Yeah.
then they revised it to 23. They may have a revision coming out in the next week or two. We'll
Right.
see. I know they do kind of like 2 week forecasts. So again, it's hard to judge the entire season because we're not through it yet.
Right.
I think once we get through mid or late October, we'll have a pretty good handle on kind of how this will probably wrap up.
Well, and you had mentioned Colorado State. I want to mention so Phil Klotzbach, who you and I have both talked to several times. He put out a post today, and I think it's really fascinating. First off, Phil's famous for saying long range hurricane forecasting is humbling, right? I mean, we get that. But of course, I'm scanning to try and find this darn thing. Okay, all right. So Phil Klotzbach 3 hours ago said, and I quote. So, what the heck is happening with the Atlantic hurricane season? And is this going to be an enormous forecast bust? Colorado State will post an updated, extensive discussion on its website by the end of today. So, even if he doesn't touch his forecast, he's at least going to put out a note with his analysis to just kind of see what's happened, why it's happening, that sort of thing. It'll be interesting to read that. But I think we've discussed here just kind of a lot of the broad strokes in it, um, as far as kind of the state of affairs right now.
And also, starting, I believe it was this year, the Climate Prediction Center has been putting out kind of like a 3 week
Yeah.
forecast and highlighting parts of the Atlantic Basin. I've been keeping those maps. And I mean, so far, again, it goes to show this is not easy
Yep.
forecasting. They keep highlighting these areas. And while there may be a low nearby, it shows kind of like the percent chance of tropical development. And one of them was like, hey, it's going to happen in this area. And it's like, no. And then the
Yeah.
next week was like, something was highlighted, didn't happen. So
Right.
um, I think the lows have been there. The activity has not been probably as
Right.
numerous at this point that we may have thought.
Well, yeah, the lows have all been there, whether it be in the 500 millibar level or at the surface. There have been pieces of energy, just like
Hmm.
a good point. Even just Texas these last couple of days, like look at the satellite here, okay? Just look at Texas, okay? Texas has had this area of low pressure just sitting. In years past, this thing would have been a tropical storm just sitting there and soaking them. It just had the environment has not been there to bubble this into anything organized. Isn't that something when you really think about it?
Right. And then even last night off the southeast coast, there was a clear, like meso low, may not have had a lot of upper level support. But last night, evening and into the overnight, there was a clear spin, at least on the radar. Um, you could pick it up, and it was sitting over the Gulf Stream. So if it's all about just warm water, I mean, maybe that would just blow up. So that's why, again, we say there's so many different ingredients in play. You can't just say, oh, the water's above
Right.
average. You're going to get all these storms because, hey, let's be real. Even if the water is average, you're still talking about water temps in the 80s.
Right, right. It's there. The atmosphere is just not giving it to you. So, and there's so much we know about weather, so much we still have to learn about weather. And I think there's a good lesson there for people that, whether it be a social media meteorologist who's, oh, it's gonna
Hmm.
be a category 10, or whether it be a doctor of meteorology who thinks they know it all. Nobody
Right.
knows it all.
Right.
That's all.
Yep.
Yeah. So, all right. Hey, I kind of love the idea of, hey, I got nothing else. What about you, my
Right.
friend? Anything?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's good. And maybe next week we'll show some, we can go back and show some maps to show people that, hey, we have seen some of these lows tracking in the
Yeah.
areas. And I mean, we talk about it, but we can just like show a handful of maps and
Right.
say, these parts of the pattern are coming back. They're just not developing into tropical systems,
Yeah.
which, you know what? That's fine.
Yeah. Totally good with me. All right. Listen, thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, everybody, for joining us from sunny Central Florida. I'm West 2 meteorologist Eric Burris.
And in Savannah, Georgia, I'm WJCL 22 Chief Meteorologist Jeremy Nelson.
See you.